Welcome, 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 Liberty lovers. This is Matthew Struck with Why Libertarian. Good evening, coming at you at 5 p.m. here. This is going to look to be one of our one time slot we're going to be looking at going forward to consistently, put these live casts out at the same time. If you're looking to watch these in the future, before we get rolling here, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like, share, retweet, comment. I definitely want to hear what people have to say about some of these things that we're talking about. So really quickly, we're looking at, we're in the throes here of scandal, obviously, almost always in the throes of scandal within the last 2 weeks before an election. A lot gets thrown around. And I wanted to put together a quick video on why I think Democrats should really give a good look to Joe Jorgensen as an option to vote for. I get the people saying that, if they're never Trump or it seems like a lot of people are more so against Trump than pro Biden. Some folks are pro Biden, but I think a lot of people really have a fear of Trump, and that's really what's driving their impetus to vote Democrat. But I really think that Joe Jorgensen has a lot to appeal to Democrats on. One of the big things that I wanted to say is, in the midst of scandal here in these 2 weeks, a lot can happen as far as voting goes. You have a lot of preliminary, like early voting that's going on right now in many states across the country. I think we're blowing away the early voting numbers and the mail-in voting numbers from 2016. I think that's pretty obvious with the circumstances of COVID and what's surrounding that. But so I think there is also a lot of room for the winds of change here in the last 2 weeks as well. A lot of folks are still probably on the fence. A lot of folks are still probably thinking about, do I need to be anti-Trump and just vote Biden because of that? Or are there other aspects of Trump's platform that I need to vote for? Well, look, with all of that, kind of rhetoric going on, or all of that thought process going on, I think that folks on the left should really give a good look to Joe Jorgensen. And here's why. Really looking at the Biden-Harris ticket, there have been some major failures over the last 20, 30, 40 plus years in the case of Joe Biden. Obviously, criminal justice reform has been a big question mark, a big conversation that's been happening recently, especially with the protests, with the riots, with Black Lives Matter. And, at the heart of that is the Joe Biden crime bill, right, in 1994, that effectively, kind of threw the book at folks in terms of certain types of crimes and repetitive crime, and that really disproportionately hurt young Black males when it came to that crime bill. You're also looking at issues associated with decriminalizing things that are racially biased in the criminal justice system. One of those things being marijuana and other types of drugs. There's been a long time for Joe and a shorter time, but still a time period where Kamala could even have been a vocal supporter of marijuana legalization, and it just hasn't happened. I don't think anyone should take it to the bank and have faith that, there's going to be any kind of major legalization push on the side of the left. I think they're courting that narrative and that group that would be driven to vote for that. But I really don't see a gigantic push for that. And I'm going to show you some numbers in a little bit as to why that might be or why that might not be. All right. Immigration reform. I'm going to show you some statistics from the Obama administration, which, remember, Biden's standing right next to him, from the Obama administration, and specifically comparing Republicans and Democrats in general, all right, and the rates of, say, deportation to kind of point to where they're at from an immigration standpoint. And the last two things I'm going to talk about are taxes and the deficit. Look, no administration for a long time, with the exception of maybe 1 year of Bill Clinton, has been good in terms of, tax deficit, inflationary spending. All of those things have been a complete train wreck that have caused major problems for the middle class as well as the poor and the impoverished. And so, we really have to look at that and that track record. I know Joe's on the record saying that, I'm not going to increase taxes for anyone who makes under $400,000 per year. He's talking about income taxes. But what about all the other taxes that you pay? Sin taxes, gas taxes, excise taxes, all of those things are fair game. And so you can hang your hat on, we didn't increase the marginal rate for anyone who made $400,000 a year or less. But that really doesn't give you the whole picture. It doesn't give you the whole picture at all. All right. So those are kind of the policy pieces that I would look at on the Biden-Harris side, especially if those are the major ones. If you're, a left or a liberal or a Democrat voter this election, let's put a little screen share up and let's look at a couple of items here. So the first thing we're going to put up is this is basically the incarceration rate broken down by demographic over the last, 30 some odd years, 40 some odd years. Basically, it breaks down into the top graph is male and the bottom graph is female. And if you notice over time, it's risen. It kind of peaks in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then begins to fall off. And you'd say, well, that actually works pretty decent in the corner of Obama and specifically Biden's administration. So that actually looks pretty good. The incarceration rate dropped. And yeah, that's a good thing, but there's a lot going on here. And if you notice, it kind of similar dynamic in the female statistics as well in terms of incarceration rate. So maybe it's a good thing, but we have to follow through and ask the next question. And the next question is a decrease in the incarceration rate for, say, in this instance, specifically black males, is that leading to a decrease in the population? Is that leading to less total people in prison? And I think this chart will tell you that's a big fat no. The number of folks that are in prison and jail over the last 90 to 100 years has risen precipitously. And over the last, say, 40 years, it has gone up astronomically, absolutely astronomically. A huge portion of that big red blob at the top of that graph is black males, young black males that are being incarcerated. So the rates are dropping. But one of the impacts of the 1994 crime bill and some of the fall off from that was things like 3 strike laws, things like mandatory minimum sentencing. All of those things made it so that you could decrease the incarceration rate over the last 10, 20 years. And still you're getting a huge increase in the number of prisoners that are in the prison system. All right. So now let's look at this as well. This comes from a Forbes article. Sorry, the last one was basically a Wikipedia pop out, and the chart of incarceration rates came from Statista. But this is a Forbes article, and it does a little bit dated. I think it's back from 2018, but it looks at overcrowding in prisons. So why is that important? We have a decreasing rate at which folks get imprisoned based off of their demographics, but we have a hugely increasing number of people in our prison system. Well, it results in, now, the United States is not worst as far as overcrowding, right? We are 113. But notice, at 113, what's the percentage? We're still at over 100% capacity, 103.9% capacity. Now, also call into question the fact that in the United States, we have a ridiculously outsized number of prisoners that are in prison versus all of these other countries probably combined in the top 10 or 20 don't even combine to have nearly as many people in prison as the United States. So that's something that you have to remember. Not only are we the world leader in imprisoning people, but we're also overcrowding our prison system. So we have so many people locked away, and we've put so much money into our prison system to build out prisons, and yet we're still overcrowding the prison system. So now also look at this. This is an article put out by the U.S. Department of Education. Again, it's slightly dated. It's back from 2016, but again, we're still within the last 20 years. This report basically points out that spending in the corrections system dwarfs increases in spending in education. And so we're basically spending like 3 to 4 times a year, at least in terms of the increase in the rate of what we're spending on corrections versus the education system. So that just goes to show you what the priority has been. And it's not like Obama and Biden reversed course on that. That has always remained constant. It is my position that the prison system is so overcrowded and we have so many people that part of the reason why the incarceration rates have dropped off as just a rate for, say, young black males or young white males or young Latino males has just been from a fact that we have nowhere to put them. That is a huge consideration. Something that is driving a number of these policies has absolutely nothing to do with the respect of politicians for humans and individuals in this country. I think a lot of it is driven by necessity. I think we're just running out of places to put prisoners. And so a lot of the push on the side of the left as well as on the right, in consideration of whether it be drug legalization or descheduling or criminal justice reform, it really has to do with the fact that we just are running out of places and we have an unsustainable model for incarcerating so many people. So much so that we might be, hopefully, fingers crossed, we might be at its climax. But even if we aren't, we're still going to continue to see people that are put in prison for victimless crimes and for smoking a plant. So keep that in mind. The next chart I want to show you is the poverty rate. So before we were talking about Biden and Harris and their positions on, say, taxation or on the deficit and inflation. Well, just look at this graph. There's a poverty rate on the bottom as a percentage of the population. If you've noticed, it's slightly down over time. As of late, it's kind of flatlined because when you go through these boom and bust cycles every 10 years, it kind of has that dynamic. But if you notice that the last cycle that we're kind of in the throes of here started in 2009. So you're talking about basically the Great Recession. You're talking about 2009, and you're talking about basically the number of impoverished folks are increasing, and you have a poverty rate that's basically staying about the same. Well, why is that? Why is it that the rate of people falling into poverty is the same, and yet the number of people in poverty is increasing? Well, one of which has to do with the fact that you have decreasing standards of living, meaning that you could stay on the same level, but end up worse off. And a lot of that has to do with deficit spending and inflationary monetary policy. All right. The other dynamic I want to point out here is you have growing numbers of people that are in poverty, and you have growing numbers of people that go to prison. And I don't have the research articles in front of me, but there is a direct link between living in poverty and being more likely to A, commit a crime, and B, go to prison for it. Okay. And I would add in there, C, get the book thrown at you because you have to deal with an overworked public defender and you don't have a decent defense team. Okay. So something to keep in mind. Remember, this is not just the era of Trump. It's not just the era of the Republicans that came before. This is the era that also includes things like Bill Clinton and his administration, includes Obama Biden's administration. So just keep that in mind. All right. So the last thing we're going to look at, or second last thing, is going to be the immigration statistics as far as deportations go. If you notice on this chart, and this is pulled from the Cato Institute, it basically looks at the total number of folks that have been deported by presidents, by administrations. And so if you look, the administration that holds the title for the largest number of deportations is the Barack Obama administration. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story because, again, the amount of illegal immigration has also fluctuated over time. So maybe he just got stuck with a really high period of time where there was illegal immigration, not to mention the fact that there's also a point made here, and I've highlighted the paragraph at the bottom here. It basically says that most incoming presidents are stuck with the immigration policies at least for a year of the prior administration. And so there needs to be an offset included for that. And the final conclusion is that when you adjust for essentially yearly averages, what you end up with is Republicans and Democrats, on average, deport the same amount of people every single year. Okay. Now that average is a rolling average. When you're looking back at Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland, they're only deporting a couple thousand to 9,000 people a year. But we're talking about in terms of the pro rata numbers, or the rate typically is the same exact rate between either side, Republicans and Democrats. All right. Now, that keeping that in mind, if you're voting for any Democrat, but specifically if you're voting for Biden because you think he's going to be better on immigration, he's not going to, send as many people home, especially when a big conversation has been about amnesty and whether or not people coming to the border should be given amnesty hearings and considerations. I think you're kind of chasing your tail on that one. I think if you get a Biden-Harris administration, they're going to deport just as many people on average, on a rate kind of basis as a Republican-led administration. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, the last thing I'm going to point out before I kind of get to my wrap up here and talk about really Joe Jorgensen's platform and where that aligns with these issues is this. And this is basically the ticking time bomb that we have. It is the national debt. Okay, $27.1 trillion as of this moment in time. This is a bipartisan, just despicable problem. This is a bipartisan problem because year in and year out, both Republicans and Democrats vote for deficit spending. Now, the Republicans will try and tell you that it's always the Democrats that are pushing for the additional cost, right? They'll always tell you that it's always the Democrats that are pushing for additional amounts of money to spend on, everything and anything that their heart desires. But Republicans don't push back, or if they do push back, it's just kind of a hollow, empty show of, to say that they tried, right? Well, we tried, right? That's the best that we could do. Well, you tried and you failed, all right? But they're not necessarily wrong because they spend like drunken soldiers, drunken sailors, and so do the Democrats. So this is not a problem that's going away. In fact, this is a problem that gets dramatically worse with every second that we have an imbalance in the federal budget, every single second. So keep all of that in mind. And now think about the fact that Joe Jorgensen has common sense positions on each one of these that would appeal to Democrats. All right. Joe Jorgensen is on board with ending victimless crimes. You should not go to prison if you've done something that the state or feds say was a crime and there was no victim. It was basically you chose to do something for yourself, smoke a plant, ingest something, and there's absolutely no crime, no victim. There should be no crime in that situation. And Joe's actually on board with, pardoning a ton of folks that are in the prison system right now for these victimless crimes. You want to talk about, why we're at max capacity, over max capacity in our prison system? It's because we send people to jail for making choices that they should be able to make with themselves because it involves their body, their labor, their property, and their assets, and it does not negatively infringe on anyone else's rights. She's in favor of descheduling drugs, and also what that brings into play is it allows them to be treated like a health issue, not a criminal issue. All right. Not to mention the fact that the drug war is inherently racist. Now, I'm not saying that, the sole purpose of enacting all of the laws. I think some of the laws were specifically targeted. Some of the first drug laws were specifically targeted actually at the Asian community on the West Coast. But so some of the drug laws were, but not all of them. But at its execution, when it gets executed, the drug war is inherently racist. It impacts certain racial and ethnic groups far worse than it does others, and the others specifically being, the 35% or so of the population that are white males, or 70% that are just white males and females that are in the population. Ending civil asset forfeiture. Ending this policing for profit kind of model that exists. Okay. I get the intent, but there is absolutely no reason why the police should be able to take your things and, regardless of whether or not you're found guilty or not, be able to profit or fund their operations. There are tons of examples of folks that have had their personal property stolen because allegedly it was included in the commission of a crime or attached to the commission of a crime. The police took that property, used it, sold it, raised cash, used the property up, and the individual was found not guilty but could not get their assets back. So essentially they were stolen from by the police. And civil asset forfeiture. Both of those two things right there would make a gigantic impact in terms of how police interact with individuals within any community. And the last one is a big one. Demilitarize the police. Okay, there's no reason why a local or county police force should have an armored personnel carrier. It's absolutely ridiculous. Or a riot tank. There is no reason why police should be militarized. If there is something that's going on that requires military attention, it should be the National Guard that comes in. It should not be a local or county or even state level police force. It really should not. All right, immigration reform. Libertarians are always alleged to be pro wide open border, like it's the Wild West. That's not true. But what are they for? They're for reducing completely arbitrary quotas from different countries. Part of the reason why we have this ongoing fight between whether or not someone should get amnesty or not really boils down to quotas and which country we're willing to accept folks from. And libertarians are for streamlining the immigration process. Let folks be able to go through the immigration process smoothly and more efficiently. We want the best from around the world. There are so many examples of individuals that are extremely well educated. They could be a huge benefit to the United States as citizens, and we don't allow them to stay. We allow them to come for school, and then we kick them out, and they go back to their home countries, even though they would rather stay here, and they do great things there, as opposed to doing great things here. There's also tons of folks who come across the border who want to do it legally, okay, if they had an option to, and they would be fantastic additions because they're willing to work hard and they want the American dream. That's what they want. They want to be American. Now, reduce spending and taxes for everyone. Now, a bunch of Democrats might step back and say, whoa, you're going to reduce spending. That's all those support bills and government support bills and things like that. There are so many areas where you can cut spending. Well, it will not directly affect people's lives in terms of whether or not they can buy food or support themselves. Okay. The most bloated parts of the budget are not parts of the budget that are welfare, believe it or not. But this perpetual tax and deficit spend and print as much money as possible so it raises the price of staple products that poor people and people in the middle class need every single day, it's not sustainable. It's basically going to end up creating tons of more impoverished people over time. And like I said, going back to this chart on basically the poverty rate in the United States and the number of people in poverty, I mean, the example's there, right? The writing's on the wall. Increase upward mobility. Let's get regulation out of the way of individuals who are in the lower quartile of incomes. Let's allow them to create businesses and hustle and make money for themselves and kind of have their own fate in their own hands financially. Let's get regulation out of the way. Let's get regulation out of the way so those folks don't necessarily have to put in thousands of dollars in order to start an entrepreneurial endeavor. Okay, let's make sure that those folks don't need to try and find thousands of dollars that they don't have in order to do something that would get them out of poverty. Braiding hair, baking confections, making music. Like, there are so many instances. There's also so many manual labor, blue collar type things that folks could do on their own for themselves. But the regulations just make it almost impossible for them to be able to get out of it because they have to dig into their pocket before they even start running the business. All right. And the last thing is, again, get a handle on the deficit. The biggest threat to America right now is the deficit, the federal deficit, state and local deficits, okay, and just the insane tax environment that we have in the United States. It is not, when someone talks about cutting taxes and getting taxes out of the way, it affects everyone. And the problem is the narrative always gets skewed towards, oh, well, it's going to help millionaires and billionaires. Well, you know what? A lot of the taxes that are applied to things that are really cheap and thought of as everyday expenses, the most benefit there goes to individuals, because that millionaire or billionaire might get a couple of bucks in their pocket, but the individual that has to buy that thing on a daily basis is getting so much more. They're getting the use value of that item. And so even though someone is getting wealthier, someone else is also, many people are getting something that is much more powerful, and it's cheaper access to products and goods and services that they need to live. That is immense. You can't even put a dollar figure on that. And the problem is folks might try to, which is the problem. You can't try and put a dollar figure on it. You need to let people be able to get goods and services that they need at a cost-effective price, and getting those taxes that aren't income taxes, that aren't, sales. I mean, even sales tax is punitive from that level. It affects the poor and the middle class way worse than it affects the wealthy. But so we have to get a handle on that. So the last thing I would say is, look, even if I haven't swayed you, even if you say, look, I have to vote Biden, I have to vote him no matter what because you're afraid of Trump or something like that. Just think about it this way. If you're in a deeply red state, okay, your vote probably isn't going to push Biden over the top because of the way that we vote and because of the Electoral College and just how things kind of hash out. If you're in a deep red state, please, please, please think about voting for a third party. Even if it's not Joe Jorgensen, think about voting for the Green Party, okay? We need additional voices in all of this. And the fact that we only have a choice between A or B is what's causing a ton of these problems. We need a way to offset kind of more authoritarian positions within the Republican Party on criminal justice, on police conduct, on taxing and spending, and on immigration policies. And you know what? You might actually be able to affect more change, or at least take more away from the Republicans in a deeply red state by voting for a libertarian, because libertarians draw equally. They draw equally from both sides. And so if you get to push them up in that state that might never vote Democrat in a long period of time, you might actually be able to elevate, say, a libertarian that could also pull the more conservative votes from Republicans in order to, get another voice that's out there, that's saying at least some of the stuff that you want to hear, at least some of the policy positions that you would like to see spoken for on the federal level. Or even on the state or local level, if you have libertarians running on the ticket and they're opposed to Republicans, and maybe there's not a decent, or maybe there's no Democrat running against them, please, please, please vote for libertarians that are running. We have an amazing one in Indiana right now that's running for Senate. Ricky's running for Senate. He's absolutely fantastic. Dude, he's like within 10 points. He's within 10 points of, I think he's running against Tom Cotton, within 10 points. So, please, even if you feel like you have to vote another way on the president's, on the president's position, please think about voting for a libertarian on the down ticket item, on down ticket positions, especially if there's not a decent or any Democrat running against a Republican. So I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate your attention, any attention that you give this. Again, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, retweet, comment. I would love to hear what you have to say. I would love to hear if you are still voting Democrat despite what I had to say. If you're entertaining voting for Joe and you are formerly a Democrat, I would love to hear what you have to say on this. So we're going to have more lives coming at you. Again, we're going to try and do this again next Tuesday night at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And keep an eye out. The only way you get the notification automatically, or you can be sure of it, is if you're following or you're subscribed. So I definitely appreciate your time, and we'll have another one coming at you.